Tonight, we're heading into the heart of New Mexico, a land where the echoes of ancient secrets pulse beneath the earth, and the shadows never truly leave. From ghostly encounters in long-forgotten towns to dark forces that slither just below the surface, we're about to unfold 10 of the most disturbing, true New Mexico horror stories that will make you question whether the world we see is all that's truly real. But before we step into the darkness, most viewers make one massive mistake. They watch, they're terrified, but they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss the stories that only the bravest souls dare to face. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button
now, because the terror waiting in the dark tonight is far from over. Now tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments, because here the night is just getting started, and the horror, it's only just beginning. Let's dive into the abyss.
There are places in this world that were never meant for us to find. Places that predate our histories, our gods, even our thoughts. The town of Ashford, tucked deep in the forgotten hills of New Mexico, was one of them. I came there in the summer of 2017, answering a letter from my old friend, Jacob Warren. We hadn't spoken in years, yet his letter was urgent, frantic, written in a hand so shaky it was hard to read. "Come to Ashford," it said. "I need you to see it. I can't bear it."
Alone anymore. There was no return address, only a map drawn in the margins. I arrived just before sunset.
Ashford wasn't on any modern GPS. I had to follow broken country roads, passing dry riverbeds and skeletal forests. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. There were no birds in the sky, no insects buzzing, just a heavy, unnatural silence that pressed down on my chest like a weight. When I finally rolled into the town, my headlights caught glimpses of decay, collapsed roofs, shattered windows, dust-covered cars abandoned at odd angles, like the owners had simply vanished mid-drive. Not a soul in sight, not even a stray dog. Something deep in my brain, something old and animal, screamed for me to turn back. But Jacob was waiting. The farmhouse sat on the outskirts of town, hidden behind a row of leaning, blackened trees. It looked wrong even. From a distance, a crooked, hunched thing, sagging as if the very earth was trying to swallow it. The wood was black with rot. Strange symbols, circles tangled with lines almost like webs, were carved into every surface. Door frames, windowsills, even the mailbox. Jacob was waiting on the porch. He looked terrible, gaunt, sunken eyes rimmed with purple, skin stretched tight over bones, so thin I thought it might tear if I touched him. "You came," he whispered, like he didn't quite believe it. Then, almost to himself, "Now you'll see too." Inside, the house was even worse. The air was thick, heavy, choking with the smell of damp earth and old blood. Every window had been nailed shut with thick planks. The floors sagged. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing in slow, shallow gasps. Jacob led me to the living room. Candles burned in a wide circle on the floor around a hatch built into the center of the room. A hatch covered in the same tangled, circular symbols. "They're underneath," Jacob said, staring at it with wide, glassy eyes. "They've always been underneath." I wanted to ask what he meant, but I couldn't. The moment I opened my mouth, a deep vibration ran through the house, shaking. The floorboards rattling, the old glass in the window frames, the candles guttered, the lights died. A thick, crawling darkness seeped in from the edges of the room, sticky and heavy. and from below the hatch, a sound, a slow, wet scratching. Something dragging itself up from the depths. Jacob grabbed my arm, his fingers icy cold. We found the
hollow, he whispered. We woke it up, and now it's hungry.
He told me in broken, gasping sentences about the thing they had discovered, an ancient pit hidden beneath the farmhouse, deep and endless, older than the hills, older than time itself. He and a few locals had stumbled upon it while digging the new well. And when they opened it, they let something out. Something that should have stayed buried forever. At first, it only whispered. Low, humming voices in their dreams. Then came the moving shadows, the impossible things glimpsed just at the edge of vision. People started disappearing. Animals were found twisted into shapes that made no sense. The town emptied out, the survivors fleeing without ever speaking a word. But Jacob had stayed because the hollow had chosen him. It whispered promises he could not refuse. It needed witnesses. It needed believers. And now it had me too. That night I heard it. Lying in the guest room, staring at the cracked ceiling, I heard the slow, dragging scratch of claws on stone. Faint at first, then louder, closer, until it sounded like something was just beneath the floorboards, crawling upward. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Something heavy pressed down on my chest. Through the window, I could see the trees bending inward toward the house, their blackened branches twitching like fingers. And the stars, God, the stars, they weren't right anymore. They spun and twisted in impossible patterns, forming strange, writhing constellations that seemed to pulse in time with the scratching sound. Near dawn, Jacob came to me again. His face was wrong now, stretched, distorted, his mouth too wide, his eyes too deep. "They're coming," he said, in a voice that was barely human. "The hollow is opening wider. It wants you too." He led me outside into the pre-dawn mist. The ground shuddered under our feet. At the edge of the woods, where the clearing should have been, there was only a hole, a perfect yawning maw in the earth, rimmed with black stones slick with moisture. Shapes moved within it. Tall, thin things with too many limbs, too many eyes, faces that seemed to twist and melt like wax in a flame. The hollow was awake, and it was hungry. Jacob fell to his knees, laughing and sobbing at the same time. The ground around the pit pulsed, cracked, and began to bleed. Dark, oily blood that soaked the earth. The trees bowed lower, groaning like dying things, and from the pit a voice rose, not a voice made of sound, but of pure, crushing thought. "Join us!" I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to my car. I only remember the feeling of the ground.
Heaving, the sky folding in on itself, the stars screaming in a language I couldn't understand. Now, years later, I still dream of Ashford.
Of the hollow. Of Jacob's twisted face grinning at me from the shadows. And sometimes when I'm lying alone in bed, I feel it again. That slow, patient scratching from beneath the floorboards. It's getting louder, closer, every night. I know.
Now, you don't escape the hollow, you just delay it. One day, it will open beneath my feet, and when it does, I will fall, tumbling down into that endless dark where flesh and mind and soul are devoured by ancient, forgotten hunger. And the last
thing I'll hear will be the whisper of the hollow welcoming me home. The desert of northwestern New Mexico is a place where the earth seems older than memory itself. The rocks lean at odd angles. The winds moan in strange voices, And under the endless stretch of burning sky, there is a silence that feels heavy, watchful. At the heart of this forgotten land lies Chaco Canyon, a sprawling ruin of ancient stone houses, ceremonial kivas, and cracked, crumbling walls. Tourists call it beautiful, mystical, but those who have camped there overnight know there is something wrong beneath its beauty, something that watches, something that scratches, something that hungers. I came to Chaco Canyon in late October as part of a university archaeological study. There were 6 of us, 4 students, a guide, and Dr. Ernest Bellamy, our professor. A man whose obsession with ancient civilizations often crossed the line into madness. He spoke often about the mystery of the ancestral Puebloans, how they built roads straight across impossible terrain, how they aligned their buildings with stars that no longer burned in the sky. He also spoke, late at night, when the wind howled, across the dark mesas, about the darker legends, about how the people didn't simply move on because of drought, about how something woke up beneath the earth, something they could not fight, so they fled, and left the canyon behind like a trap set for fools. We set our camp near the ancient plaza, surrounded by half-fallen walls and doorways that seemed too small for any ordinary man. The first day passed uneventfully. We mapped out parts of the great kiva. We collected soil and pottery shards. The sun was brutal, and the air tasted of dust and something else, something sweet and rotten that clung to the back of the throat. That night, as we sat around a struggling campfire, the guide, an old Navajo man named Thomas Greyeyes, refused to join us. He sat apart, mumbling prayers under his breath, a string of turquoise beads clutched tight in his fists. He warned us not to stay after dark, said the ground here was thin, said things that were meant to stay buried were awake again. Dr. Bellamy laughed him off. "Superstition," he said, waving a hand. "We are men of science, not frightened children." And so we stayed, and so we suffered. The first sign was the scratches. In the morning, we found our tents clawed by long, deep gouges. At first, we thought it must have been coyotes, but the spacing was wrong. Too wide, too deliberate. Some of us, myself included, woke up with thin red lines across our skin, as if something had dragged its claws lightly over us while we slept. Still, Dr. Bellamy insisted we stay. He claimed it was important, that the deeper truth of Chaco was just within reach. He spoke of hidden chambers, buried ceremonial pits sealed for centuries, hiding secrets not meant for human eyes. That night, the desert changed. The wind died, leaving behind a stillness so complete it pressed against the eardrums. The stars flickered weakly overhead, smudged by thin, unnatural clouds. And from the ground beneath us we heard a sound, a slow, rhythmic pulsing, like something vast, breathing. Deep under the stone, I woke after midnight to find the camp in chaos. The guide was gone. His footprints vanished at the edge of camp, as if he had been lifted straight into the sky. The fire was out, though the wood remained untouched, as if the flames had been swallowed whole. And the earth was moving. A deep vibration shook the stones like the heartbeat of some monstrous thing rising from its ancient sleep. I stumbled toward the center of the old plaza. There, I saw Dr. Bellamy standing with his arms raised to the broken sky, muttering in a language I had never heard. Words that tasted of dust and grave rot. Words that seemed to pull the light from the stars themselves. The cracked ground beneath him split wider. A foul steam, thick and oily, hissed from the widening gap. And then it came. At first, it was just a shape. a darkness darker than the night itself. Then the details emerged, a mass of writhing, pulsing tendrils, slick and wet, covered in patches, of scaled hide and eyeless mouths that gnashed and gurgled in hunger. From its center glared a single, massive eye, milky and blind-looking, yet somehow seeing everything. It oozed out from the crack, filling the plaza, dwarfing the ruins with its impossible size. The sight of it bent the air around it, made the rocks tremble, made my vision blur at the edges. It was a thing that hated the sun, hated the living, hated the very idea of man, and it saw us. One by one my companions vanished, swallowed without. A sound pulled screaming into the pit of the creature's bulk. Except for Dr. Bellamy. He stood laughing, a high, broken sound until one of the tendrils snapped him in half like a dry twig. His boot, only his boot, remained, somehow untouched, perched neatly atop a boulder 50 feet away. Still perfectly laced. I ran. Through the broken walls, through the cold, silent desert, heart-hammering, lungs tearing at the air. Behind me, the thing slithered and heaved, reshaping the canyon with its grotesque bulk. I could feel it stretching toward me, its hunger a cold hand around my heart. I don't know how I made it to the ranger station at dawn. I barely remember. Collapsing, raving about monsters and dead gods and ancient curses. They found no trace of the others, no tents, no supplies, no footprints, just the boot, still sitting there, waiting, and in the center of the ancient plaza, the cracks had closed,
Up.
as if nothing had ever happened, as if the canyon itself had swallowed its shame. I have never been the same since. Sometimes, when the night is too quiet, when the stars blink strangely overhead, when the earth seems just a little too still, I hear it again. The slow, wet slither. The breath of something vast and patient beneath the ground. Waiting, and I know it is still there. Waiting for the stars to fall wrong again. Waiting for the ground to crack open. Waiting for me. Waiting for you. In the dry heart of New Mexico, where the wind never stops howling and the land itself seems cursed, there lies a forgotten ruin called Cuervo. Once, long ago, Cuervo was a proud stop along Route 66, a place where travelers filled their gas. Tanks bought cheap meals and slept beneath the hard stars, but the years crushed Cuervo like an insect under a boot. The highway shifted north. The people packed up and left. Now all that remains are skeletal buildings and roads, swallowed by sand like the bones of a giant creature half buried in the desert. But Cuervo didn't die quietly. No, something far worse happened there. Something the desert, in all its terrible hunger, could not fully hide. I had been warned. Old men in nearby towns spoke of Cuervo only in whispers, crossing themselves after every mention. They spoke of missing time, hours, sometimes days, vanishing from a person's memory like smoke in the wind. They spoke of travelers who parked their cars, stepped into town and never came back. And most of all, they spoke of the wrong-faced people, the things that wore human skin like masks, that danced and laughed and called your name from the
Ruins? If you hear someone calling you, an old gas station attendant said, his voice shaking, you don't answer, you don't even look back. I should have listened.
God help me, I should have listened. It was a late afternoon in July when I found myself near Cuervo. The sun was boiling the horizon into a shimmering mirage, and the sky stretched out above me like a cruel, empty eye. The car was running low on gas. There were no other towns for miles. So when I saw the cracked, green road sign, Cuervo, next right. I hesitated for only a moment before turning off the highway. The road into Cuervo was a broken spine of concrete, weeds clawing up through every crack. The first thing I saw was the church, or what was left of it. Its steeple leaned at an impossible angle, like it was about to snap off and fly away. The cross at the top was nothing but two splintered beams, barely holding together. Past the church, the town, sprawled out in ruins, collapsed motels, rotting diners, hollow-eyed houses with roofs like peeled-back skin. The air felt heavy, like breathing underwater, and even though the sun still hung in the sky, Cuervo was drowning in shadows. I parked near what had once been a gas station, its windows smashed out, its pumps leaning like drunken scarecrows. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I noticed how quiet it was. Not peaceful, dead, no birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind, just a thick, smothering silence that pressed against my ears. I walked a little way into town, drawn by some force I can't explain. That's when I first noticed it. The flickering, it was subtle at first, the way the light seemed to shimmer, at the edges of my vision like heat waves rising from the ground. Then before my eyes, Cuervo changed. The broken windows were whole again. The ruined buildings stood tall and clean. The streets filled with people, laughing, chatting, moving about their lives as if it were 1947 again, but there was something wrong. So wrong it made my skin crawl and my stomach churn. The people's faces were blurred, as if a careless hand had smeared them. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes with tangled strings. Some shuffled stiffly, others twitched and spasmed as they walked, and even though there were dozens, maybe hundreds of them, no one spoke with a voice. Their mouths moved, but the sounds that came out were twisted echoes, like someone trying to remember what laughter was supposed to sound like. Then, from somewhere deep inside the town, a new sound. A voice, clear and sharp, cutting through the choking silence. It spoke my name. I froze. I hadn't told anyone here my name. There was no way they could know. The voice came again, closer this time, dripping with a sickly sweetness. Come in. Come see us. I turned toward the sound and saw a woman standing in the doorway of a half-collapsed house, or at least something trying to look like a woman. Her dress was from another time, a polka dot pattern, cinched at the waist, faded and dusty. Her hair was matted, her skin the colour of old wax. And her face, God, her face was melting, sliding off her skull in sagging folds. Her eyes were black, lidless pits. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide as she called again, her voice gurgling, like water swirling down a drain. Behind her, in the darkness of the house, something vast and unspeakable shifted, a mass of limbs and mouths, endlessly writhing. Panic exploded inside me. I ran. The world flickered again. The old, ruined Cuervo flashing back into place like a broken film reel. But the wrong-faced people were still there, now scattered across the streets, all watching me with their featureless heads. Hands reached out from the shadows. Hinged jaws yawned open in silent screams. The whole town seemed to ripple toward me, collapsing and rebuilding itself with every step I took. I didn't look back. I didn't answer the voice, even when it screamed my name so loudly it rattled my bones. Somehow, I reached my car. The keys slipped from my shaking hands twice before I jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I tore out of Cuervo tires, spitting up clouds of dust and shredded asphalt. When I hit the highway again, I risked one glance in the rearview mirror. The town was gone. Not fading into the distance, gone. Nothing but open desert behind me. The clock on the dashboard blinked at me, confused. It was 3:14 a.m. 3 hours had vanished, swallowed by Cuervo. I had no memory of what happened in that time. I never went back. But even now, years later, I sometimes hear it. Late at night, when the wind shifts just right. A voice, clear and sharp, whispering from the corners of the room. Come see us. We miss you. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I swear I can still smell the dust of that dead town, feel the cold, jerking hands reaching for me through the dark. And worst of all, sometimes when I open my eyes, just for a second, I see Cuervo standing outside my window, waiting. There are places in this world where the veil between what we know and what we shouldn't touch grows dangerously thin. One such place rises out of the desert plains of New Mexico, a jagged black monolith known as Shiprock. The locals, especially the Navajo, treat it with deep respect and fear. They tell stories about it in low voices, never daring to look at it too long, because at night, when the wind howls across the empty mesas and the desert floor seems to breathe, the top of Shiprock
flickers with eyes, hundreds of them.
Tiny, flashing, watching. I had always thought of myself as a rational man, a scientist at heart, even if my career was in photography. I believed every place, no matter how mysterious, could be explained by light, weather, geology, the cold, clear rules of the world. In 2007, chasing the last pieces of old Route 66, I found myself near Shiprock just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I knew the legends. I had read about the missing hikers, the strange sightings, even stories about people who returned from the rock. Different. Empty. I thought they were just that. Stories. Now I know better. I parked my truck a few miles out at the edge of a dry riverbed. The land was dead silent. No birds, no insects, not even the sigh of wind you usually hear in the desert at night. It was like stepping into a vacuum. Still, I set up my camera. The fading light painted the desert in sickly purples and deep, bruised blues. Shiprock itself loomed like a dead god's throne, jagged and broken, silhouetted against the bleeding sky. I framed my first shot, adjusting the exposure for a long capture. Click, 30 seconds passed. Click, 60 seconds. I looked at the first photos and frowned. In the long exposures, something strange had appeared. Tiny points of light clustered along the top of Shiprock. At first, I thought it was just noise in the photo. A technical glitch, but when I looked up, I saw them with my own eyes. The lights danced and shimmered along the crown of the rock like tiny stars, but they weren't still. They moved, darting, blinking, shifting positions with insect-like speed. Through my telephoto lens, I caught sight of something worse. Thin black shapes, almost spider-like, but wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. They had too many joints, and their limbs bent in sickening, impossible angles. Their bodies were skinny, bony, and their heads were small clusters of glistening, reflective eyes. Not one or two eyes, but dozens, maybe hundreds, packed so tightly they seemed to shimmer like liquid, and all of them were looking right at me. Panic rose in my chest, thick and heavy. My rational mind tried to explain it away. Tricks of the light, hallucinations, fatigue. But the primal part of my brain, the ancient part that remembered how to run from predators in the dark, screamed one word: run. I yanked my camera off the tripod and stumbled back toward the truck. But it was already too late. The black things were moving, crawling down the side of shiprock, limbs skittering across stone faster than anything that size should move. The hum started then, low at first, vibrating in the base of my skull. A sound you didn't so much hear as feel. A deep, bone-rattling vibration that made my vision blur and my teeth ache. I barely made it into the truck. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I sped away, wheels spitting sand and gravel into the night. In the rearview mirror, I saw them, hundreds of them, pouring off the rock, filling the dry riverbed, stretching thin, spidery arms toward the sky. But they weren't chasing me, not directly. They were surrounding something. I looked down at the passenger seat, at my camera, still warm from my hands, still full of images they didn't want anyone to see. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The dreams started almost immediately. I dreamed of standing on the top of shiprock, surrounded by blackness, of hundreds of tiny, sharp hands pulling at my skin, not hurting me, but peeling something deeper away, my memories, my thoughts, piece by piece, until I stood, empty and smiling, hollow as a rotten log. A few days later, I tried to process the photographs. The memory card was corrupted.
Only one file would open, which showed me standing in front of shiprock at sunset. But something was wrong. The figure in the photo, me, was blurry. Not just out of focus, but wrong in some deeper way. The limbs too long, the joints bent.
Backward. And where my face should have been, nothing. Just a blank, smooth oval. Since then, things have gotten worse. I lose time. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. Sometimes I find myself staring into mirrors, touching my face as if I'm not sure it's real. Sometimes late at night I see reflections that don't move when I do. I see tiny points of light staring back from the darkness behind my own eyes. I have memories now that aren't mine. I remember skittering across the rocks under the stars. I remember the cold wind blowing against too many limbs. I remember hunger.
But not for food, for souls, for minds. I know now that they didn't just melt my camera. They melted something inside me. They planted themselves in my bones, my blood, my memory, and I know soon I won't be me anymore. Soon I'll hear
the hum, the call, and I'll crawl back across the desert toward shiprock, toward home. If you ever find yourself near that towering claw of stone, if you feel a sudden stillness, a humming in your bones, a pressure behind your eyes, run. Run and don't look back. Because once the eyes of shiprock see you, once they touch your mind, you are already theirs. There are places in this world that the living were never meant to walk. Places where the past seeps into the earth, into the very dust, and the dead never quite let go. One of those places lies under the pale, ghostly dunes of White Sands, New Mexico. At first glance, White Sands is beautiful, breathtaking even, an endless ocean of glittering gypsum sand stretching farther than the eye can see. By day, it looks like a bright dream, but at night, under the cold, pitiless light of the moon, it becomes something else entirely. Something wrong. Something alive. The locals know. They don't camp there after dark. They don't walk the dunes once the sun falls below the horizon, because the sand is not silent. It whispers. I was never one to believe in ghost stories. I grew up hearing them from my grandmother, tales of weeping spirits and restless dead, but I always thought of them as just that, tales. When I took a job with a geological survey team in 2012, mapping underground formations near White Sands, I laughed at the warnings. The old stories about voices under the sand were cute, I thought. Harmless. I wasn't laughing after my first night out there. We set up camp miles from the nearest road, nothing around us but rolling hills of white powder and the endless sky. The air was so dry it cracked your lips, and at night the temperature dropped so low it burned your skin. The wind moved through the dunes like a slow sigh. It wasn't a normal kind of sound, not a howl or a whistle, but a low, constant murmur that seemed to come from beneath the surface. At first, I told myself it was just the breeze sliding over the ripples of sand. But then I started hearing my name. Soft, almost playful.
As if someone buried just under the earth was calling up to me through a mouthful of dust. Daniel! Daniel, come closer. I froze. The others, 5 of us in total, sat around the fire, laughing, drinking coffee from tin cups.
No one else seemed to hear it. I told myself it was a trick of the mind, the wind playing games. And then the sand around my boots shifted. Just a little. Just enough that it felt like something moving beneath it. I didn't sleep that night. Lying in my tent, every sound seemed amplified. The snap of fabric in the breeze, the grind of sand against itself, and always, under it all, the whispering. I heard names that night. Not just my own. Names I hadn't spoken aloud in years. The girl I loved in high school who died in a car crash. My grandfather, who I watched die of cancer when I was 10. Their voices, perfectly clear, calling to me from underneath the dunes. At one point, I swear I heard my own voice calling back, but I hadn't spoken. My lips were sewn shut by terror. When dawn finally broke, the whispers faded. The sand looked untouched, pristine, as if nothing had ever moved. But one of our team members, Matt, was gone. We found his tent ripped open, the inside filled with deep, strange scratch marks. Not claw marks exactly, more like long, narrow grooves, as if thousands of tiny fingers had scraped across the fabric. His boots were still there. His backpack. Everything he owned. We found his body half a mile away, buried up to his neck there.
Sand. His eyes were open wide and his mouth was full of the fine white powder. No tracks around him, no sign of struggle, just there, silent, dead, and the look on his face. It wasn't fear, it was grief, like he had seen something that broke.
Him inside before it killed him. Later, while packing up to leave, one of the older local guides told us a story. He said that White Sands wasn't just a desert, it was a graveyard, not for bodies, not anymore, but for souls, for memories, for things that had once lived but had been forgotten. He said that when the government built the missile testing grounds nearby, they disturbed something ancient, something that had been buried under those dunes long before any human civilization. "They don't want to hurt you," the guide whispered. "They just don't want to be alone." I did some digging after that, found records of a soldier in 1956 who had been stationed near White Sands. He shot himself one night after claiming he heard his dead brother crying out from beneath the dunes. The official report called it stress-related psychosis, found testimonies from hikers who had lost entire days while walking among the sands. They would come back sunburnt, dehydrated, and unable to remember where they had been or what they had seen. Found satellite images of white sands, showing massive, shifting depressions that moved across the desert like slow, unseen rivers, as if something, or many somethings, were moving under the surface. Now, years later, I still hear the whispering sometimes. Not out in the desert, but when I'm alone in my house. Late at night, I'll hear my name from the walls, from under the floorboards, from the cracks in the ceiling. Soft, patient, calling me home. If you ever find yourself walking white sands at night, if you hear your name whispered from beneath your feet, don't answer, don't stop, don't look down, don't listen. Because the dead in white sands are not resting, they are waiting, hungry for the memories we leave behind. And once they know your name, they never forget it. There's a place at the edge of Gallup, New Mexico, where no one dares to go. It's a broken ruin now, half burned and crumbling, standing like a rotting monument to something forgotten. Somewhere in the dust and decay, it still has a name, but no one remembers it anymore, and if they do, they don't speak it. The hotel was once a refuge for travelers, a stop for weary souls who needed a bed for the night, but that was decades ago. Now it is little more than a skeleton, its walls eaten by fire, its rooms emptied of life. It was never a place people wanted to stay. Even in its prime, there was something about it. Something wrong. Locals whisper about it, passing it in the dead of night with their heads down and their eyes away. But there are those who don't listen to the warnings. One of them was a man who came through Gallup during the winter of 2003. He was a drifter, a vagrant, looking for shelter in the cold. With nowhere else to go, he took refuge in the old hotel, telling himself he'd only be there for a night. That night turned into something much worse. The man's name was Roy. He was homeless, wandering from town to town, never staying in one place for too long. He had heard the stories about the hotel, but the cold was biting, and he didn't have any other choice. He set up in one of the old rooms, the air heavy with dust and the smell of charred wood. The windows were covered with blackened boards, but he didn't care. He just wanted warmth and a place to sleep. But as the hours passed, Roy started to feel like he wasn't alone. It began as a faint sound, a knock, a slow, deliberate knock. It came from somewhere deep in the hotel, from a room far down the hall, maybe 2 floors up. He thought maybe it was another vagrant or the wind banging against a window. But then the knocking came again, closer this time. It wasn't the sound of wood on wood. It was a soft tapping, almost like a fingernail scratching at the door from the inside. He tried to ignore it, but it persisted. Tapping, tapping. It echoed through the hallways, coming from rooms he hadn't dared to open. The knocking grew louder, then began to sound like scratching. Roy's heart began to race. He tried to leave the room, but when he stepped into the hallway, he felt something was wrong. The walls, they seemed to move. The hallway stretched farther than it should have, bending and twisting like a maze. The door he had exited through was gone. In its place was another door, one that led to a staircase. He climbed the stairs, trying to find his way out, but the steps led into shadows that seemed to stretch into infinity. At the top of the stairs there was another hallway, darker, longer, as if it led somewhere else, somewhere far beyond the physical building itself. The knocking continued. Now it was coming from all around him. Every door he passed rattled, its hinges creaking in the dark. He felt eyes watching him, though he saw no one. Then the door at the far end of the hallway opened on its own, revealing a room that shouldn't have been there. It was impossible. A room with furniture that had no right being inside this hotel, decorated in an old-fashioned style, but twisted somehow. The chairs facing the wrong direction, the curtains fluttering as though blown by a breeze that didn't
exist. Roy stepped forward, drawn by the odd, magnetic pull of the room.
But, as he did, the floor beneath him shifted, making a horrible sound like teeth grinding together. His eyes widened as the hallway began to twist around him. The walls stretched, slithered, and seemed to grow hands. Jagged, rough shapes that
reached for him. Suddenly the knocking returned, but this time it wasn't from inside the rooms, it was from the walls.
The walls themselves were knocking as if they had a mind of their own. Roy bolted, his panic reaching new heights as the hotel seemed to rearrange itself around him. The walls folded, the floors shifted, the rooms began to merge, the hallways collapsing in on themselves. He ran and ran, but every turn led him back to the same spot, the same door, the same staircase. And that's when he realized something worse. The knocking had stopped. Now there was only whispering. The voices slithered into his ears, curling around his thoughts like vines. And then, from the deepest part
of the hotel, something began to move. When the police found Roy, he was curled in a corner of the lobby, his back pressed against the wall.
He was shaking uncontrollably, his clothes torn, his face a mask of terror. His eyes were wide open, as if he had seen something beyond human understanding. He muttered only one thing as they dragged him away. The hallways grew teeth. Roy was sent to a mental hospital after that. The doctors said it was a psychotic break, a result of stress and the isolation of living on the streets. They chalked it up to his imagination, but the local police knew better. They had seen the marks on the walls of the hotel. Deep, claw-like scratches, as if something had tried to tear its way out. And when they went back to check the hotel, they found something strange. The rooms had changed again. The layout was different, the halls longer, the stairs leading into the depths of the earth, as if the place had never been built by human hands. The hotel was growing, changing, and in the corner of one room they found a strange carving on the wall. It wasn't in any language they recognized, but one thing was clear. It had been scratched. No one goes near the hotel anymore, not since Roy's disappearance, and not after the police sealed it off. But the locals still remember the stories. The whispers that crawl from the hotel after dark, and the strange knockings that come from within, as if the building itself is still alive. Waits, it calls, and it feeds. In the heart of southern New Mexico, beneath the endless skies and sun-scorched earth, lies a wonder known to the world. Carlsbad Caverns. Tourists flock there every year, marveling at the underground halls, the alien-like limestone formations, and the eerie, endless darkness. But those who truly know the land, the old miners, the ranchers, the native elders, they speak in hushed tones of a part of the caverns that is never shown on any tour. A place even the bravest will not approach, a place they call the Living Pit. Long before the area became a national park, miners came chasing silver and saltpeter. They dug deep into the earth, carving out shafts and tunnels, and it was then that they found it, a natural sinkhole so deep no one could find its bottom. At first, they thought it was just another cave, a new wonder to explore, but soon strange things began to happen. The men who worked near the pit spoke of odd sounds, faint sighs and groans, like the earth itself was alive and restless. They said loose rocks and equipment would sometimes roll towards the pit, as if pulled by invisible fingers. Some claimed the ground would tremble softly underfoot, as if something far below was shifting in its sleep. At first, their warnings were ignored. Until the disappearances began, it started with small things, tools missing, helmets found crushed, as if by great pressure. Then a man, a strong, seasoned miner named Paul Haskins, vanished during a routine shift. All they found of him was a boot, torn free and splattered with dust, sitting neatly by the edge of the pit. No body, no blood, just the boot, waiting like an offering. A few weeks later, another man disappeared, then another. Soon the crews refused to work anywhere near the pit. The mining company, desperate to keep profits up, declared it all superstition, hallucinations brought on by exhaustion and bad air. They posted new workers there. Within days, the new workers fled. Stories spread among the townsfolk. They spoke of whispers drifting up from the darkness, of cold, moist air that smelled of rotting meat and old, rusty iron. They said the pit was alive, albeit that it wasn't a hole but a throat, and it was hungry. By the 1940s, the pit was sealed off, hidden behind false walls and forgotten by the public. The authorities said it was too unstable, too dangerous. But the locals knew the truth. You don't seal away unstable rock. You seal away something that needs to stay buried. Decades passed. The living pit faded into rumor and ghost stories. Until 1993. That summer, a group of adventurous tourists, led by an overconfident amateur, spelunker, decided to sneak off the official paths and explore the forbidden tunnels. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they crept through crumbling shafts and narrow crevices, pushing deeper into the forgotten parts of the caverns. They found the pit just after midnight. At first, it was just a dark wound in the stone floor, yawning wide before them. Their flashlights could barely pierce the thick, black void. The air around the pit felt strangely heavy, making it hard to breathe. Then, the breathing started. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft, slow inhalation, like a massive beast pulling in air through a throat the size of a house. The flashlights flickered, the ground trembled. One of the tourists, a woman named Carol, stumbled forward as if something unseen had grabbed her sleeve. She screamed and scrambled back, her voice echoing strangely against the walls. Then came the exhale. It hit them like a wave, hot, moist, and reeking of death. The smell was unbearable, a mix of rotting meat, spoiled milk, and ancient blood. One man dropped to his knees, vomiting into the dust. That's when they heard the whispers. Dozens of voices rising from the pit, speaking in a language no one could understand. High, dry voices like brittle leaves rustling in a dead forest. The tourists ran, but the tunnels seemed wrong now, twisted somehow, folding in on themselves. The way they came in no longer led back to the surface. The walls seemed to pulse gently, breathing with the pit far below. It took them hours, or maybe longer, to finally stumble back to the main cavern trails. They were changed when they returned, hollow-eyed, trembling, unable to explain what had happened. The guides said they must have gotten lost, suffered from bad air and panic. But the locals shook their heads. They knew the pit had tasted them and had let them go only because it was not yet ready to feed. Today, the living pit is still hidden, far from the public's eyes. The park officials deny it exists. But sometimes, on the hottest nights of summer, when the moon is high and the desert is quiet, A strange, heavy sigh can be heard rolling across the empty land, a breath that comes from deep below, waiting, hungry, listening for the next fool to find their way into its waiting mouth. Everyone thinks they know Roswell. Ask anyone and they'll mention the summer of 1947, a crashed UFO, strange debris scattered over the desert, the sudden, suspicious government cover-up. They'll smirk and say, flying saucers, right? They'll talk about Area 51, weather balloons, alien autopsies, but there's a piece almost no one knows. A sliver of the story that never made it into the books or the documentaries. And it began not on a ranch, not in the military hangars, but inside a small, forgotten radio station, KTRZ, sitting lonely on the cracked edge of Main Street. Roswell, New Mexico. KTRZ was tiny, barely alive even in 1947. It was one story tall, the paint peeling off the wood, the neon on-air sign buzzing like an angry mosquito. By day it played slow country tunes and sermons from dusty preachers. By night it barely managed to hold on to a signal through the dry, electric desert air. The night it happened, July the 2nd, 1947, it was Eddie Collins who manned the booth. Eddie was young, 22 years old, always chewing gum and flipping coins between his fingers. He didn't believe in much. Not ghosts, not aliens, not anything he couldn't see and punch. That night, a dry wind rattled against the station's thin walls. The sand hissed as it scraped across the parking lot. A lonely coyote howled somewhere out in the hills. Inside the station, Eddie spun a record, Hank Williams crooning about lost highways, and leaned back in his chair, half asleep. 58 p.m. the music stuttered, then it warped, like a tape getting stretched and torn, and then silence. Eddie jolted awake, blinking at the dead air, blinking on the console. He muttered, cursed under his breath, and adjusted the dials. Maybe the transmitter was acting up again. Maybe it was just the desert storms. He didn't notice at first how heavy the room felt, how thick the air had gotten, like something invisible was pressing down on his chest. Then the speakers crackled, and something else came through. It wasn't music, it wasn't voices, it wasn't anything Eddie could name. It was a wet, chittering noise, like thousands of tiny mandibles clicking and sliding, whispering against one another. The sound slithered along the booth's walls, across the floor, up the legs of Eddie's chair, and then came a word. Clear, sharp. It didn't blast through the speakers. It slid into his mind, whispered inside his skull. Hunger, Eddie scrambled, backward, knocking over his coffee. The hot liquid splashed across the console, and for a moment the smell of burnt wiring filled the room. The chittering grew louder. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was movement. Something huge, unseen, pacing just outside the thin walls of the station. The building itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with invisible lungs, and under it all, a new sound, the faint, almost childlike giggling of something terribly wrong. Eddie panicked. He lunged for the reel-to-reel recorder, jammed.
A fresh tape in and hit record. He didn't think about it.
He just needed proof. Needed someone else to hear what he was hearing. For 3 endless minutes, the machine whirred, capturing the strange noise, the whisper of hunger and something else deeper. A low, thick rumbling like some sleeping beast dreaming of its next meal. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the power died. The lights flickered once, then snapped off. The room plunged into darkness. Outside, Eddie thought he saw shapes moving against the starry sky, tall, twisting forms with too many joints bending the wrong way. He grabbed the tape, shoved it under his jacket, and ran. Within an hour, blacker trucks rolled into town, unmarked, silent. Men in black suits with blank, doll-like faces descended on KTRZ. They moved through the ruins of the station with clinical efficiency, pulling out every wire, smashing every console, ripping every drawer. From its hinges, they never asked questions. They simply took the equipment, the tapes, the files, even Eddie's notebook scribbled with panicked notes. They left no trace that KTRZ had ever broadcasted that night. But they missed one thing, the small reel of tape Eddie had hidden in the lining of his jacket. For days, he kept it secret, locked inside an old lunchbox under his bed. But secrets don't stay buried forever. Eddie started hearing it again, the chittering, even when he wasn't near a radio, in the pipes, in the wires, in the buzzing of the streetlights outside his window. The whispering followed him. The word gnawed at him. Hunger. He stopped sleeping, stopped speaking. His skin grew pale and tight, stretched like old leather over his bones. Neighbors said he wandered the town at night, staring into empty windows, smiling at nothing. One night, they heard him screaming. They broke down the door and found him curled in a pool of blood, clutching the kitchen knife he had used to gouge out his own ears. When they asked him why when they tried to understand the madness, he only muttered a single word, over and over hunger. Eddie died 3 days later. His body was found smiling, staring up at the ceiling, as if waiting for something to come through. Today, KTRZ is long gone. The land it stood on is now an empty dirt lot, covered in scrub and dust.
No one remembers it. No one talks about it. But sometimes, on quiet, humid nights, if you drive past the outskirts of Roswell and tune an old radio to the deepest, loneliest part of the AM dial, you might hear something slipping through.
The static. A wet, clattering chitter. A single, cold word. Hunger. And if you listen too long, if you listen just right, you might find yourself hearing it inside your own head and realize far too late that something ancient and starving
has finally found you.
During the Second World War, something strange grew in the desert near Los Alamos. Most people know about the Manhattan Project, how the government gathered the brightest minds to build a terrible new weapon. Scientists, engineers, mathematicians, a hidden city built in secret, a place of locked doors, long corridors and whispered warnings. But what most people don't know, what was carefully erased from every report, were the lights. They came at night. It started small. A security guard on the eastern fence, a man named Harold Reeves, saw it first. At around 2 a.m. while walking his lonely patrol, he noticed a strange shimmer in the air above the facility's far side. At first, he thought it was just the heat. Desert air plays tricks on tired eyes. But this wasn't heat. The night was cold, bitter even, and the shimmer grew clearer, thicker. He rubbed his eyes and blinked hard. Floating above the sand was a lattice, a giant net of pure white light, crisscrossing in impossible patterns, stretching wide and tall like some web spun by a thing too large for any sane world. It wasn't still. It pulsed, a slow, sickening throb like a heartbeat, and the air buzzed around it, full of a crackling sound, thin and sharp, like an endless swarm of insects rubbing their legs together. Harold collapsed. They found him twitching in the dust, blood dripping from his nose and ears. When they dragged him back into the medical tent, he screamed about the ones trapped between, clawing at the walls like he was trying to climb away from something no one else could see. He died 2 days later. His official file said, heat stroke, leaks. Men who knew better said nothing. After that, the lights came more often, always after midnight, always hovering low over the restricted buildings, the ones with the deepest basements where experiments were done that no one spoke about, not.
Even in whispers, more guards fell.
Some had seizures, some wandered into the desert, never found again. Those who stayed started carrying crucifixes and muttering prayers when the sun went down. Scientists would arrive the next morning to find strange burn marks in the sand.
Huge geometric shapes, too perfect to be random. Circles within circles, lines that bent wrong, impossible angles that made the eyes ache and the stomach twist. And through it all, that soft, crackling hum filled the night, growing louder every
time the lattices appeared. There were theories, of course. Some said it was just experimental technology, radars or force fields being tested in secret. Others whispered about radiation poisoning or hallucinations from the stress of the war. But a few of the older physicists, the ones who spoke with heavy accents and carried old books tucked under their arms, said something different. They said, the lights weren't machines, they weren't natural, they were gates, tears in the skin of the world, places where the barriers between dimensions wore thin, flapping like torn cloth in a rising storm. And whatever was on the other side of that skin, whatever lived in the cracks between worlds, could see us, could reach through. One night in 1945, right before the Trinity test, the lights came again. Only this time, they didn't just hover above the ground, they descended. The guards on duty that night, 3 men in total, were later found half buried in the sand, their bodies stiff, their faces locked in wide, unnatural smiles. Their eyes were gone. Not gouged out, not damaged, just gone, as if they had been erased, leaving smooth, blank skin behind. In the center of the field where the lattice had landed, the ground was blackened, not burned, rotted, as if the life had been sucked out of the earth itself. The generals covered it up, of course. Files were sealed. Witnesses were reassigned or disappeared. The official story became simple: stress, heat stroke, hallucinations. But the scientists, the real ones, and the ones who understood what they had been tampering with, knew better. They knew that in trying to split the atom, they had split something else, something older and far more dangerous. A doorway had been opened, even if only for a few seconds, and whatever glimpsed through from the other side, it had seen us. Today, Los Alamos stands clean and polished, a monument to American victory. Tourists snap photos, guides give sanitized tours, but sometimes on cold desert nights when the stars shimmer a little too much, workers still hear the buzzing, still see faint, crisscrossing lines of light flickering just above the ground. And sometimes, if you listen very carefully, you can hear a low, desperate whisper carried on the desert wind. Help us. Still trapped. Still
watching.
There's a road few dare to take anymore. A strip of cracked blacktop that veers west out of Socorro, cutting into the lonely heart of the New Mexico desert. Along that road, where the dust swirls like ghost smoke and the mesquite trees twist, like dying hands, lies the half-forgotten village of Magdalena. Even in its best days, Magdalena felt uneasy. like a place the world meant to leave behind, but somehow forgot. The houses sag under their own weight, the windows stare out with hollow eyes, and the streets seem to remember every sorrow ever laid upon them. But outside the village, past the last crumbling fence and the last withered cottonwood, stand something older, something no one speaks of unless they have to. The old adobe church. No one remembers who built it. No one remembers the name it once had. And maybe that's for the best. The church leans drunkenly into the earth, half swallowed by time. The walls are baked red from 1,000 brutal summers, and the wooden steeple, blackened with age, still clings stubbornly to the sky. There are no doors anymore, no glass in the windows, only jagged holes and dark, gaping mouths. Yet somehow the bell still hangs in the tower, and somehow, impossibly, the bell still rings. The villagers have rules about the church. Never go near it after sunset. Never listen if you hear the bell. And no matter what, never answer if someone calls your name from inside, they say the bell. Rings without ropes, without wind. It rings by itself, long and mournful, a sound like something vast and hungry stirring in its sleep. And sometimes, after the ringing fades, you'll hear something worse. The voices. Dozens at first, then hundreds.
Low and raspy, chanting in a language so old it tastes like dust in your mouth.
The sound seems to crawl up from the ground itself, threading into your bones, sinking into the soft, secret parts of your mind. The first time you hear it, it's easy to walk away. The second time, it's harder. The third time, you'll feel your legs pulling toward the sound before you even realize it. It doesn't matter if you're scared. It doesn't matter if you scream. It just wants you closer. There are stories, of course. The rancher, Elias Gutierrez, found babbling in the desert, his mouth packed with dirt. The traveling salesman who walked into the church one evening and was never seen again. Only his suitcase was found, ripped apart, and thrown miles away. The tourist girl, Samantha Dean, who filmed herself walking toward the church on her phone. But the video ended suddenly, the last frame showing her smiling blankly at the camera, her eyes wide and glassy. The villagers will tell you these are just legends, but they say it with fear behind their teeth. Because the truth is worse. The truth is, something inside the church is alive, and it is patient. Some nights, especially the nights when the desert air feels too still, too heavy, strange lights appear around the sinking church. Pale, flickering orbs like dying stars, bobbing and weaving through the broken windows, and shadows too. Tall and thin, wrong in the way a spider is wrong, wrong in the way a nightmare feels wrong, even after you wake. They move fast, skittering, across the dirt, slipping between walls that seem to bend and breathe in the corner of your eye. If you see them, you must not follow, even if they whisper your name, even if they sound like someone you love, because they are not your loved ones. They are only wearing the memory of them, like masks stretched too tight over hollow things. Some believe the church is a gate, but not to heaven, not even to hell. To something deeper, older, a place where things that should not exist are waiting, dreaming in the black folds of reality. And each time the bell rings, the gate opens just a little more. Each chant, spoken by the unseen voices, pushes it wider. Each lost traveler who steps through is another offering to the darkness beyond. The cracks around the church grow deeper every year, spider webbing out through the desert like veins feeding something buried and monstrous. There will come a night, no one knows when the church will vanish completely into the earth, when the bells will stop, when the voices will fall silent. And on that night, it will not be the church that disappears. It will be us. If you ever find yourself near Magdalena when the moon is thin and the sky is too quiet, if you hear the faint sound of a bell echoing over the hills, if you think you hear your own name whispered out of the dark, do not stop. Do not listen. Do not answer. Because if you do, even for a second, you will feel your body walking toward it. Your
mind screaming inside, and you will become one of the voices trapped beneath the earth, waiting for the next lost soul to join you.